Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome back to Top Secret News Radio Show. I'm your host, Christina George, and once again, I am back with another great guest. I have been very fortunate of just having some amazing guests that have just lined up. We're, I think, booked out about 2 months, if I'm not mistaken, at this point. So, got lots of great guests and topics. But again, we always want to know what you want. So, if you have a story, if you know somebody you'd like to have on the show, a topic you would like me to cover, make sure to either private message me, put it in the comments, any of that. All right, with that being said, we are going to go ahead and get ready for the show. I apologize for no show last week. I was out of state. I went to Virginia City, Nevada, and did some little decorating and investigating and having some fun. So, uh, back now, ready to go. We've got a show booked every single week, so it's going to be amazing. Hey, Robert, nice to see you. Hope you're feeling better. All right. So tonight, and I am so actually so glad that we're having this guest on tonight because he was booked, well, probably 3 or 4 weeks ago, and from the UK. So it was at the time we were doing the show at 4 o'clock, so it was midnight his time. Stayed up, we get all prepared for the show. We're in the studio, everything is going great, and then we both had some weird stuff happen prior to the show. And so when we started talking about it, he said, "Oh, yeah, when I'm on shows, usually things like this happen." And I said, "Well, that's funny because normally when I do shows, I have crazy things happen." So it was like a perfect storm. And so waiting for the countdown. Now, the whole time on the studio monitor, I'm seeing the start button to go live. And I'm just waiting for a little countdown clock, and it comes to zero, and the live button disappears. And I mean, gone. I couldn't get the show to start, no matter what I tried. Hey, Karen, thank you so much for joining. And we both sat there and like laughed a little bit because we're like, oh yeah, this is definitely something that can happen like this. But I said, all right, let's just reschedule you, bring you on. I still want you on, and so we are back tonight. So um, if for any reason you catch this late, whatever, or if you're here for the whole show, do me a favor after the show and share, share, share. All your friends, your page, groups, things like that. Let's get the information out. It's so important. All right. So, again, tonight, my guest is Michael Kameron, and we're actually going to be talking about alien abduction and MILAB, as well as his book. So we got like a whole lot of things we're going to cover tonight. And now that I have full control over the show, if we have to go over a little bit, we can. So Michael was actually born in London during the 1970s, and he was raised a strict Roman Catholic in a strict Roman Catholic family, very much similar to me, and a community alongside priests and nuns. He's also a British author of the book High Strangeness, A Lifetime of Alien and Paranormal Encounters. And he describes himself as an alien abductee and MILAB and experiencer of high strangeness. Now, I actually came across a interview with Michael. I think it was maybe on TikTok, and very, very interesting because everybody knows I have said, there's a connection between, the paranormal stuff that we experience as well as, the abductions and contact, all of that. Hey, Rebecca, so nice to see you. Uh, so when I find other people like me, it's amazing. I can't wait to get him on the show. And Michael is no different. So let me go ahead and bring him on. Hello, Michael. How are you?
Hi, how are you? You right?
I'm good. I'm good. You know what? Look, determination got us on the show because boy, oh boy, I was everything, like I said, everything was perfect all the way up until the countdown of the last 5 seconds. And as soon as it hit zero to go live, the whole live button just disappeared. And I tried everything. I tried getting out of the software, coming back in. No matter what I did, it wouldn't come back. So I appreciate you staying up again and on another night and coming and having this discussion with me tonight. So
Sure. I mean, we don't sleep much anyway.
that is very, very true. Want to say hi to Carol. Thank you for joining. I appreciate that. And Karen Taylor is saying, "Hey, Michael."
Hi, Karen. It's nice for you to
All
be
right.
here. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. All right. So a little bit of what I was saying was very true. I came across an interview that you had done, and I came across it on TikTok. And of course, immediately I was kind of drawn to you and your story. So, I reached out to you. And it's interesting that, for a while now we've been talking um, over social media. We've been, sharing a lot of our stories to each other. And come to find out they're very similar, which seems like it doesn't happen very often. Let's just put it that way.
Sure.
So I want to talk about, like, where did it all start for you?
Well, it started for me in the East End of London. I was born, and I was an unexpected child. I was born premature. I was in hospital a long time. But when I come back out of the hospital and arrived back at what would be my childhood home, the household started to experience, or be plagued by poltergeist activity, which previously hadn't happened before. And so, in my book, I describe my three brothers, Francis, Kevin, and Sean. Francis and Kevin are a lot older than me and Sean. Sean's 2 years older than myself. And a lot of experiences that I had was with Sean at first. But in the house itself, it had the typical cold spots in specific areas. There was objects that would move and vanish and then reappear. Um, in the nighttime, my parents were often going to bed in the nighttime, and then there would be strange sounds that would appear in the nighttime, banging on walls, and during the 1970s, the houses, the walls were really strong. And so, if you were to bang on them, it would be just more like a thud. It wouldn't sound like anything, but these were like echoing, almost like stereo surround. And when you come down every night to investigate this strange banging, there was obviously nobody there, and you'd go back to bed. But what I was told much later on, though, by my parents and my brothers, is that when I was a child, when I was a baby in the cot, there was what would be, I guess, now described as balls of light flying around my cot, and
Mhm.
also at times there was a entities were seen looking over my cot down at me. But my parents, being because they were strict Roman Catholics, they never really mentioned it to anyone.
Right.
Which is, and also even the poltergeist activity got a lot bit more sinister. As I described in other podcasts, my brother Francis at one time was laying in bed, and we had a large, really heavy oak wardrobe that was toppled over on top of him in the bed. When there was nobody there, and he wasn't hurt, he was just shocked. And another time, Kevin was coming up the stairs, and something pushed past him unseen, and pushed him right down the stairs. So when this activity started to getting a little bit more sinister, it was then that my parents reached out into the community, and they spoke to a Roman Catholic priest who then come in, as usual, and bless the house, and the activity started to fade away. But um but as for anything else, when I was growing up in this house, there was a lot of, the book that I've written, it describes most of the activity in this particular childhood home and in the immediate area, because I was brought up in the grounds of a school. So I lived in a school house, and my dad at the time was a schoolkeeper who looked after it. The house and the school was belonged to the Roman Catholic Church. Um, but in this particular house, though, I started to see. what my parents first of all believed were invisible friends. But when I was, obviously, as I said, when I was researching the book, and it was only much later on in my life that I started to investigate that there was something strange happening in my life, lots of strange happenings. And then I come across what were similar beings that I'd seen as a child, which were the typical Nordic type looking beings, with the
Okay.
long blonde hair, pretty like athletic type builds.
Right.
Um, and these particular beings, they used to appear to me in this house. I mean, there was one time, as I described, I was going up the stairs to my room, and I closed the door behind me, and then a little while after that, these two beings, a male and a female, appeared in front of me. And what I remember of them is they used to talk to me, but as not with their mouth, but in the mind. And as I describe in the book, I don't remember what they said, but I remember we used to play games like Follow the Leader and things of this sort. But I remember one time my mum coming up the stairs. I had the door closed, and I could hear her walking up the stairs, and I could hear her standing outside the door, listening on the opposite side of the door to my conversation. Because I could hear her feet moving, on creaking on the floorboards as she
Right.
shifted her weight on her feet, I guess. And then, when she come in, I'd been talking to these two beings who were standing on the opposite side where the windows were. And my mum come in and she sort of looked at me puzzled and asked who I was speaking to. And I said to her, my friends. But as I turned back to my friends to see and talk to them, they was no longer there. And then when I turned my gaze to my mum, it was, I didn't understand where they'd gone. Um, and my mum, she come over to me and basically said to me, I'm sure that they'll be back. And it was because she thought that they were invisible friends. But what I didn't tell my parents is that they were adults that were coming to me, and these particular adults were a lot bigger than any of the adults around me, and
Right.
obviously looked a lot different. But it was in these times though that I started to see them more and more in the house. I remember another time I was downstairs. I was playing with Matchbox toy cars, the miniature ones. I don't know if you remember them, Christina.
Yeah.
And I was playing with these, and my mum was in the kitchen preparing lunch. And I had a feeling, and overwhelming feeling, that I must leave where I was and to go upstairs because someone was coming to see me. And at the time, it felt like it was more like a command. And so I put my toys down. I went up the stairs and I went into one of the rooms. And I was told, in my mind, I had the feeling, the thoughts of that you shouldn't go anywhere, you must stay and wait. So then when I was waiting, I didn't have to wait too long for one of these particular beings to appear in front of me, which was the male one of the two that I'd seen before. And I remember him standing close to me and looking down at me as I looked up at him, looking into his eyes. And as I describe in the book, it seemed like I experienced an altered state of consciousness where the room and the environment around me sort of vanished. And, I describe this as the Oz factor, which was first coined by the British researcher Jenny Randalls, who described this particular phenomenon when coming into contact, either with either a UAP or particular beings. But when I come out of this type of trance, this particular being had vanished. But at the time, he'd been speaking to me again in the mind. But as I describe in the book, it seemed as though he wasn't speaking to me as a person, but speaking to another part of my mind that I seem to have. It felt like there was another part of me giving him information that was coming from another part of my being. This is very much in line with the military projects as well. Um, But when I come back from this trance, what I felt was a tremendous fear that something had happened and I needed to get away from this room. I needed to escape from this room and get away. I was really afraid. And I rushed down the stairs to get back to my mum. My heart was beating really fast. As I described, I almost fell over myself on the stairs to get away. But and I went back to my mum and I told her something had happened, and she just sort of comforted me and said to go back and play. And then, as I started to play again, the thoughts of this and whatever happened just faded into the background. But as I described, I had a lot of this where I saw these beings, and and I felt fear from them. But it's somewhere in between that time of that trance-like state, I had missing time. So and I never knew what happened. And sometimes this is why I describe in the book, the Nordics are often described as being, benevolent. But, because I had these experiences, I've always sort of had it as 50-50, were they good or
Right.
did something happen because of the way that I experienced them.
Yeah.
So sorry, go
Have you?
on.
No, I was gonna say, have you ever considered, or have you gone through any like regression hypnotherapy to try to find figure out what's going on during that missing time?
Well, it wasn't until the 1990s that I described in a different location that I sought out to have regressive hypnosis. But when I did, actually went to see 4 different types, and I was laughed at and told to go away, basically, that I was crazy. And
Mm.
these were professional people. I've tried to have it done again recently in the UK, but I think it's the British Hypnotherapy Society or Association. They told me that they no longer do this. They consider it to be something more like something from the Dark Ages. They even gave me a warning to be careful of anyone who declares that they can do this for me, because
Well,
it's not allowed in the UK now, I don't think.
that's interesting. I would agree on you need to be careful
Yeah,
because they're yeah, Carol, exactly. I was just about to talk. So, a good friend of mine, she used to originally she was part of my team, part of the UFO side. So we did investigations of US UFO sightings, sky watches. We did talk to abductees, contactees, anything like that,
sure.
Bigfoot, all of that. And she actually does the regression, and here in the US in Sacramento, and she specializes in abductees. So it was very interesting because for years when I knew her, she'd always say, oh, you should get regression hypnotherapy, and like,
Mm,
because your life is just so strange and outrageous that something's got to be there. But my thing was like, I had interviewed so many people and seen documentaries and movies, different things about the regression hypnotherapy, and it always seemed to like traumatize people
yeah,
because they now this wall has been broke down and all these memories come rushing in, and I have seen people who have gotten from other people that I don't know, but they came back like very, very traumatized, kind of a PTSD. And so whenever I hear stories like that, it made me scared because it's like I felt like, okay, well, if there's a block and I can't
yeah,
remember, there's probably a really good reason. More
yeah,
like my brain can't handle whatever. Now I've been through a lot, and my brain has handled a lot, but I'm like maybe it's more than I can handle. When I had my own experience um, in the in the craft, uh, it had me almost suicidal when I came back from that. I was not myself. I did not know what to do. I called actually one of my lead investigators, and he said, are you ready? You need to call Lori. And so I called her, and I think that same day, later that day, I went and met up with her and went
Mm.
through it. And what I loved about her is that hers was like a very different technique. So it was like more of like a third party. So when you're revisiting things, it's like you're watching a movie. And so you're just
Sure.
kind of spectator. And I didn't have any like emotion attached to it or anything like that. So I did get a lot of answers, but it left me with more questions
Yeah,
and
that tends to do that,
questions that I
doesn't it?
don't know that I need to know right now.
I mean, the thing is, though, there are two aspects to that. There is obviously which you have to take into account as well, which you have just said, Christina, about the mind and how the mind, protects you from something that is potentially
Yes,
traumatic, especially as a child.
yes,
But we do also know that the greys in particular, these that are more prominent in the abduction phenomena, that they have the ability also to, you know, to conceal those memories from you
right,
in order, in order, and this is, I mean, this is a good way of actually, taking people as well, because a lot of the activities, for abductees is done from, from a point of, it's quite insidious. In fact, a lot of abductions when they take place are often during the night time, in the early hours of the morning. You know, in the earlier days, people were taken from their cars on lonely roads,
late at
but
night, right?
yeah, and it's obviously in isolated spots. So if their activities were more, shall we say, benevolent towards people, you wouldn't need this cloak and dagger. Um,
Right,
but it's also, and then you have a lot of the abductions that take place from a person's bedroom. And again, it's often under the cover of darkness. And I think this is, when people ask you, how do you tell the difference between if it's good or bad? I think it's about how you feel about it, and how,
right,
what the methodology is that is used, to take you. I mean, if it was a human being coming into your house and removing your children from their house, maybe tying you up, the police will be involved, because it's
right,
non-humans. They're coming into your house, sometimes putting the parents to sleep,
right,
whilst they're taking normally one of the children, or a
right,
child, and taking them away. I mean, the only difference is that it's a non-human entity. But
right,
obviously, under natural law, or the creator's law, it would be then seen as a crime.
right.
It's just
No,
that we can't obviously pin them on that, pin them with this.
right. I totally agree, and it really kind of depends. I mean, I've interviewed people who have been taken, and they just seem to understand like certain things are being harvested or they're being tested on, or and they're just okay with it. They're like, well, this is necessary. And some people feel that. Other people like me feel very betrayed because it's not at my will. I'd never asked for this. So, and
I
it's
mean,
very hard because sometimes you, like you were saying, sometimes you can be in a home, you could be sleeping next to your spouse
sure,
and be
you
taken,
can.
and then nobody believe you because they'd say, well, how in the world could you be taken and somebody's sleeping right next to you? Wouldn't they have been woken up? But that's not the case.
No, it's not the case. I mean, the thing is, right, with the abduction phenomena as well, and the experiences you have, and we know that people do have positive experiences, but I think they're very fine and in between. I don't think there's
Right.
many of them. I do
No.
feel, I do feel that they are highlighted. I mean, if people are having positive experiences, that's great. You don't want anyone to have what you're
Right.
having. Why would you? And
Right.
so if somebody's having positive experiences, that's great. And if there it should be, but then you need to change the wording. It's not an abduction then, is it?
Now
you
you're
know
more just it's more of a
e-
contact.
exactly, because if I've seen people describe abductions as being positive. Well, it obviously isn't, because it's if you look at what abduction means, it's obviously
Right.
not a good, it's not something that's really a good for you, is it? It's not a
It's not
positive
something you agree
experience.
to. Right.
So the wording needs to be changed.
Yeah. No,
um
I agree.
but what I was saying is that even though it's traumatic, I mean, last year I was diagnosed officially with complex PTSD, which is basically different from PTSD in that it involves multiple types of abuse, um, or experiences over a period of decades that has never been resolved. And but as I've described briefly in my book about this, it's because it's mostly from my childhood and teenage years, when I had lots of experiences, and you had no one to talk to,
Right.
because during the 1970s, I mean, it's much more open now. I still think
Right.
there's a lot more work to do, because I still think in the UAP communities, alien abduction is still considered to some degree taboo. Um,
Oh,
it-
yeah, absolutely.
and and then when then you're speaking about MILABs, military abductions, that's even further going down the rabbit hole of bizarreness. And so it's a little
Yeah.
bit, we're only getting our heads around now, basically, you know, um, what could have been described as disclosure to some degree, a
Right.
minimal, a miniature form of disclosure. Although I've got my own views on that, but with all the, like you were saying, Christina, with the anger and everything like that can come up from this, the only thing I could say with that is that by us talking about it, and when we write about it, it's very therapeutic, but it's also a good way of channeling it into something positive that may be helpful to other people.
Yeah, I no, I completely agree with that. But yeah, I guess my question is, since your book coming out and really now kind of getting a lot of interviews and the information out, how are people responding to it? Are you getting any hate? And I mean, how is it opposed from your audience in the US opposed to, the UK?
Well, I'm getting a lot more interviews coming out of the US. I mean, I've done, I did a show the other night, but I had a lot of negative feedback from that one, because you're talking about different aspects of the phenomena, and I had quite a few rude comments made to me about it, even though I explained, I broke it down, a lot of the phenomena in this particular show, to explain what I meant, but some of the comments were quite rude, and not actually necessary. Um, I'm okay with people being skeptical, but I don't like people being rude. I think there's no
Right,
need for that.
right.
But overall, though, yeah, I get a great response from the United States, and the UK. Um, but you get a mixed response, because it's difficult, because I say, sometimes if I wasn't involved in this phenomena, maybe I'd be skeptical. You know,
Yeah,
the trouble is, it's difficult. It's, as I described, but a lot of my abductions have been from outside of the body, so they're and some people can't understand that. And the hardest thing is that with the out of body experiences, especially, under the classification of the close encounters of the second kind by the late Dr. J. Allen Hynek, he described this classification of being, proof, um, having traces of proof or trace evidence. But without body experiences, which come under more of the I guess, interdimensional spiritual realms, it's much more difficult to give any type of evidence, only for that of what you're explaining to people. So that's harder, really. But my experiences, a lot of my experiences, even to date, even now, are outside of the body. I'm taken when basically my consciousness leaves my body. and I'm removed in this way, and basically, a lot of the experiences is what you would have back in the older days, where people were removed from cars, taken on board a ship,
Right.
have medical procedures done on you. This can be done outside of the body, and when we go into the what is described as the interdimensional realm of the phenomena, this is what that is. But
And
some
that,
people, when they're listening to you, sometimes people don't get that. Um, but in the UAP community now, it's much more acceptable that all types, this type of phenomena, are not just single. They're all in some way linked together, and they're very much linked interdimensionally.
yeah, and that's very, I mean, it's very interesting that you say that because, like, with my experiences, I've told you and I've talked about on the show before, I would go to sleep just like normal. And when I would wake up, I would just be in this room, which ended up being a crack later that I find out. But I mean,
Sure.
and I just distinctively knew. But whenever I would go up to the screen, it would show me whatever I needed to know. And then once it was off, I would be right back in my bed and have full sleep paralysis.
Yeah.
So when it went further, and again, I was very cognizant of everything that was going on. So it
Yeah.
wasn't like it was a dream. Like I literally everything, I felt everything. I was thinking critically, I'm just trying to figure all of this out. And but that was my biggest thing. I was like, there's no way that I'm being abducted because if that was the case, like they would take me. I'm knowing that I feel myself going back into my body when I have the sleep paralysis. And since it was I was, being given precog. I had precog dreams. I
Sure.
also, because there was nobody out there to teach anybody anything or really educate anybody,
Mm.
I just thought that was just part of my abilities that I have. That I heard people say, oh, you got spirit guides. So I'm like, oh, maybe it's my spirit guides telling me, showing me on a TV what I'm supposed to do or what I'm supposed to see is happening. So again, hearing one of your interviews, it really that started kind of to click. Oh, okay, so it could happen that way.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things that can happen outside the body, but as I describe in other podcasts, for any people that are unfamiliar with the out of body experiences, everyone can do them. I mean, when we go to sleep at night, we come out of our bodies. Our consciousness comes above our body. Sometimes we might move around. We might not be conscious of it, but we will sometimes move around in our immediate environment. And other times you can go outside of where you live, and move around. It's just a case of relearning how to do it, but it's quite natural. Every single person can do this. It's not a special ability. Everyone can do it. It's just learning how to do it again. It's
Right.
bringing yourself into altered states of consciousness. If you meditate or do anything like this, it's much more easier to put yourself in those type of altered states. But again,
Absolutely.
if you're traveling outside, you're moving through stargates, which are basically puts you into the fourth dimension, which is very much like a virtual reality environment. And it's from here that a lot of abductees are taken. Um,
Yeah, and I could see where. Yeah, I mean, I could
I
see
mean,
where that could happen.
for instance, the greys are interdimensional. Obviously, they come into our environment, into the third dimension, but they're still using, they're using some of their abilities to move through objects. Because nothing really is physical, is it? It's made up of different molecules and electrons that are allow them to. It's basically a science that it's not understood here at the moment. But they're able to do this. There's nothing magical about it. It's just a science we've not remembered from our
Right.
past.
Carol is saying, what about those people who have had things inserted into their bodies?
Do you mean possession? Is that what
No,
you mean?
they're talking like in their sinus cavities and elsewhere,
Implants.
implanted.
Yeah, implants. I mean, um, There was an experience that I had where, when I come back from it, um, in this particular experience, I was in the bed at the time. Sean, at the time, in the house that I was in, there was literally 3 bedrooms, but it was in the room that me and Sean was in as children. We shared a large bed together,
Right.
and often with my experiences, as you were saying about where the person is put to sleep, in my book, I described that often when I'm having these experiences, Sean is next to me, and he never wakes up.
Right.
My parents are literally a door away from where we were, and their room, the door was opened a little bit. And even when I was having these experiences and I was awake and I was shouting out, my parents never come to me, not once. And Sean, and I was nudging him with my elbow and pushing him, wake up, Sean. He'd never wake up. It was almost like he was, he wasn't even in a sleep. And on this particular night, I was woken up from with something in the room as a child, and I remember seeing 3, what would be, I guess now, the Greys standing at the rear of the bed, and 2 of them come to the side of where I was on the right hand side of me, and I remember that I remember this was the odd thing. I remember that there was a black stretcher there, like a normal looking type black stretcher. And I remember I was floated up out of the bed and placed into this stretcher or onto this stretcher. And it was raised up off the bed. And I remember moving towards the windows. And I was moved outside of the windows and through the glass. It never broke. And as I describe in the book, in this particular room, it had, as you go through the windows, it had a roof there, but it was like a balcony. And I remember being touched down on this balcony, and at some point, it was floated up. I could see myself above the rooftops and the trees, and just the surrounding buildings on the opposite side of the house. And I remember going up, and I remember I was looking down. I could see, but I could only see a little bit. And I remember going up, and there was a bright light above the house. But I don't remember nothing. Then the only thing I remember is waking up in the bed. It's daytime, and my nose is bleeding. And it was, as I explained in the book, it was from this time that I had lots and lots of nosebleeds that I never had before. And now, like a lot of people that have abductions, they experience with sinus problems the whole of their life. So
Right.
we know that these objects get put into us. There are different places that they can be put into us. There could be all number of reasons why they're there. A lot of people believe that they're tracking devices, but we have these type of objects placed in us, in the MILAB communities, with the military. But a lot of the time, theirs are not tracking; they're to do with controlling the subject. And there's different types of these type of implants that can be used in various nefarious ways that are not good. But for myself, one of the this is not mentioned in the book, but one experience that I did have, though, is which I will describe in book 2, is where one day I was literally up in the bathroom, and I was standing at the wash hand basin washing my face, and I remember this small, tiny, metallic, very tiny square object fell from my mouth that hadn't been there the night before. And I had the plug in so it didn't go down the sink. And I remember it when I looked at it, it was a perfect, really, it's just like a tiny, 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 like that square, perfect square. And when I looked at it, I didn't know what it was, didn't know how it got there. And when I looked under a microscope, it had symbols on it, and it had wires on it, little tiny wires coming from it.
It's like a little transmitter or something almost.
I don't know, but what I did was I found somebody, a ufologist in the UK who didn't live far from me. He was a professional, investigative researcher. He had his office in his house, so I called him and I told him a little bit, explained to him, can I come to see him, and he agreed. And then I remember going there, and he's, went up the staircase, and in one of his spare bedrooms there was his office. So we sat down, and then I didn't show it to him first. I spoke to him and I told him a little bit about my background. I was having these experiences all my life. And I showed it to him, and he he looked at it under a much more powerful, microscope. And he said the same thing. And he says, he says, you're correct. He said, it's perfect square. And he said, it's got symbols on it. And he said, it's got little wires coming from it. And he didn't know what it was, but what he said to me was, I'll send it off to somebody in the Ministry of Defence that I know, who's in the military, and we'll see what he comes back with. Well, what happened was then a few weeks went by, I didn't hear anything, and then I contacted him and I asked him if he had found out any information, and he said he contacted this guy that he knew at the Ministry of Defence, and he said that they were told that he'd been moved. And the object, unfortunately, had gone with him at the time back then. I didn't think about really keeping it. But
Right, right,
yeah, which, and as I talk to people about it, you feel like kicking yourself, but you didn't, back then you didn't think that would
right,
happen. We know a lot more now these days, where you probably wouldn't do that. But or
right,
you'd send it to somebody. We'd send it to somebody we know in our fields,
right.
that we know as,
We knew we
you
could
know,
trust. Right.
like Steve Mira, someone like him.
Absolutely. Yes.
He's somebody that I know, that I trust, and somebody that I would send it to for scientific analysis, with
Absolutely.
much more sophisticated technology. Um, and so, but this particular guy that I went to see as well, I remember going out, him walking me up his path, and there was a building opposite his house, and it had been empty. And he said to me, if you look up in the top window, which was one of the bedroom windows, it had net curtains, like white curtains. And he said to me, what do you see? And I was looking, I could see the curtains moving. I said, I can see the curtains moving. He said, what else? And it was then that I could see a laser pointing from that window to his window. And he said to me that these are actually military intelligence officers that are watching my house. And over numerous times he'd been burgled. And when the police came to his property, they did find objects at the time. During that time, they found objects hidden in his telephone, which were listening devices back then.
Wow.
And I know that he'd been hassled quite a lot of times. And he told me that these were MI5, military intelligence 5,
Right.
that were watching his house regularly in his empty property. And even though he complained, he didn't get nowhere with this. But I
Right.
do,
Right.
but we do know that UFO researchers, especially back then, were hassled for
Very much so.
information. But what I found interesting about this particular experience I had with the Greys is that they used, an everyday what looked like a stretcher. My problem with that is why would they use a stretcher? I mean, it wasn't carried, it was moved. But
Yes.
this seems more like something what would be the methodology of the military,
Yes.
because
Yes.
we know the Greys don't need objects such as this to move people. It just seems a little bit odd, don't you think?
No, I 100%. Because even in my experience, like I said, I ended up running in directly into two people who were in all military like camo, and none of this made sense because they had like the rifle, how like the military
Yeah.
will have over the thing, and I'm thinking now I've seen out the window, so I know we're in space, and if we're in space, why would they? First, I'm looking for any kind of badges or anything, and I
Yeah,
don't see any.
insignia, yeah.
And I'm thinking, why would they need guns? Like,
Yeah.
for what? And then when they put something in my arm and I passed out, when I wake back up, I was on this gurney and in this room. And the thing that was strange was I was strapped down. And I have interviewed enough people to think it made me think this can't be like alien, like an abduction, because they wouldn't need to strap me down. They could just paralyze me, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And, but there were two little grays there, and they were at my side trying to calm me down, trying to convince me to relax. Everything was going to be okay, but nothing felt okay.
No.
And, whatever they brought into that room, I was not able to see it. I knew they went to the side of the bed and they had a sterile tray. They took off the cloth and put something. I could feel them
Mm.
touching my ear, and then I could feel something almost like my mind was making me think like it was like a spider that was crawling into my ear canal and in my brain. Now, I woke up immediately when that situation, at that point, when that happened, I woke up immediately. But I will tell you, ever since then, it's notorious all the time. It happens sometimes more than others. Where in this right ear, I will get the such a high pitch frequency that it'll either make me feel like I'm going so dizzy, like I'm going to pass out, or it'll make me nauseated. So, yeah, I think like with you, there was a lot of things, I guess, that I thought I knew from just interviewing so many people who have been abducted, even my lab people. It, just a lot of it just didn't seem to fit. So, it made me,
Yeah.
I guess, just second guess myself.
Yeah, I think I think we have two factions going on here. We have the non-humans that are abducting, and we have the military. But it's looking at the different types of methodologies, the ways that they use and do things. It can determine, I guess, who it is we're dealing with
Yeah,
at any one time. Because we know they do work together. We also know
right.
that they work, on their own, and each of them have got their own agendas. It's very much like I've had demonic experiences quite a lot in my life. I've had experiences with the what we know as the shadow people. I had a I had a particularly traumatic experiences with them, which involved what would be rape, I guess. With these particular beings when I was 16 years old. And even that, I mean, you know sometimes when I read about it, it's difficult for me to talk about that because it actually left me a real deep scar in my psyche when I had this happen to me when I was 16 years old, because it went on and on and on, and it was repeated over a period of time for me, for these particular beings to be doing this to me. And
Well, it
and
sounds like you had a succubus for sure. What?
Well, this would have been the whole, similar to the whole hag, and it basically tormented me when I couldn't move, and
Mhm.
but it was, but it would have been, it would have been rape or sexual assault, definitely.
Right,
Um,
right.
and these type of things are known to to do this. But what's interesting is it seems like with any of us that experience these type of things, it seems to be a whole lot of them, doesn't it? They come and they
Yeah,
go, and we seem to have encounters or experiences with all these type of creatures. Sometimes they just observe, and sometimes they interact with you or even attack. Um,
yeah. Carol Ann is saying she knows somebody who has had implants in both her shoulder blades, and I actually had a client years ago, an older man. He was in the military. He was retired for a long time. He was probably in close to 80 years old, and he had an implant as well. I mean, he used to tell me all of these stories. And he said, I told this story. Nobody ever believes me. Believe me. We got him in to get x-rays, and
Mm.
you could literally see it. And we got him into a doctor who then tried to, under a microscope in the x-ray department, tried to remove it. And every time they got close to it, it moved or it completely disappeared.
Yeah, I mean, you have implants not only in the physical, but you have them in the etheric field. You have them in the energy field surrounding your body. Electromagnetic or biochemical field. And we know that from people that sometimes they don't know about them, but sometimes when they go to see therapists, even Reiki practitioners, and they're scanning the field or the body, that they are sometimes they're discovered.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
I did have somebody do this, scan my body like many years ago, um, and and she found a particular device. What she said, she found something hidden inside my field, in my like I guess aura, and she said she would try to remove it, energetically remove it. But when she tried to remove it, she become very uncomfortable. She fell to the floor and basically couldn't breathe. And she told me afterwards that it couldn't be removed, and she said it was actually placed there by the military.
That was gonna be my question,
And she
because
said, and she's actually said to me that this was booby trapped. That if anyone tried to remove it, it would react to that person and attack them in some way. But she said this thing was activated when she tried to remove it energetically, and she even had two of her guides there helping her to remove it. And she said when she tried to remove it, something was released that went into her face and made her choke. And basically, she said, and she wouldn't touch it after that.
well,
Uh,
that was, I guess, the question is, I mean, yes, I guess there, could be two different types of implants.
mm,
I guess my question is, these implants that are being found in people's bodies, right?
yeah.
So in different areas of their bodies, do you, what is your opinion? Because I'm like, kind of, I feel like people who have these implants, it is somehow militarily involved, because if it was just alien, like, they can find us anywhere. They don't need to track us. It's like once they take us, they know where we're at all times. Like, they could take us anytime. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, from what I've learned about the abduction phenomena, it's not new, it's not modern. It didn't even happen, it didn't even begin during the 30s and 40s or 50s. It's been happening since biblical times. We've been taken a long time, and
Right,
the abduction program has been going on so long. This is their playground, and they're playing in it. And but they're the and also an interesting thing is that when we're finding as well military, when we're finding these implants, it doesn't necessarily mean that the implants are coming from our military.
okay,
Sometimes it's coming from off world. I mean, during the ancient times, when these abductions were taking place, and they took place in every location in the world. Obviously, there was probably more specific places that we now know to be of
right.
areas of importance where people were taken. Sometimes large numbers of people were taken and implanted. But sometimes what you find is during these times as well, people were in a way indoctrinated into what would be, I guess, modern day MILAB programs, and
Right.
implanted with these devices from what would be then not human military, but off-world military.
Gotcha. Okay. I'm
But
getting what you're
but
saying.
the thing is, though, when we leave the body and pass into, I guess, spirit, when we return back here and we're in a new body, or a container, as the Greys like to describe the body, the implants that we add back then, which could be centuries before you return here, still remain in your energetic field when you return here. When you return here as a baby, the brain activates this electrically, and it's this when they're activated, we are then shown again. We are basically on their screens again. They can find us.
Okay. Yeah,
So
that
these
was
so these are abduction programs. They're nothing new. They've been going on, but I think what you'll find is the same people over many centuries. When they're leaving the body through death, when they're returning again through reincarnation, they're choosing the same people over and over again. So it's ancestral. It runs in families. We know that. My mum was an abductee. And my parents had experiences of the paranormal, but they didn't talk about it.
right.
And it's only recently that I discovered that my grandfather, who I never knew on my mum's side, he was very psychic. He hid them. He hid these abilities. When he was somebody who could work with the weather and work with the land, which was basically 100% accurate because he worked with the planets. And back in them
Right.
days, it was unheard of to do that. He was very psychic. He knew things, but he never spoke about them. This was information that was relayed to me through a medium who told me that this particular gentleman, my grandfather, had come through to me to tell me this. And
Well, yeah, I definitely could see where that would happen. Even with mine, I mean, I didn't even really make the connection to where I even got any of my abilities from until I was an adult. I mean, until I really, it just by chance, I was like in my 30s and just happened to call my dad after going to our family cemetery in a small town out here and asked him what I call the Freemasonry
mm,
insignias were on all of our gravestones of our family. And then it was kind of like, oh, okay, well, it's time to have I guess, time to have the talk. And I was like, what do you mean it's time to? I'm like 30 something years old. I've got multiple children. Like with the birds and the bees, talk is
mm,
over, Dad. What could we possibly talk about? And he was like, well, something we don't talk about, but your abilities, you are not crazy. They come from our side of the family. And then he started like just spewing out like a volcano all this information. And I'm just thinking, you know, I didn't grow up with my dad. So it was like
mm.
all of my young childhood, teen years, even into adulthood, I never had a clue. I didn't know. It was literally just trying to figure out young life and what was going on because nobody was having the similar experiences. Like you felt
No.
very different, and it was very apparent as I got older and wanted to like make friends. And I would
Yeah.
like finally feel comfortable and say something and tell them about, oh yeah, I have these
Mm,
experiences, I can see these things. And that was the end of the friendship. So I can see where you're in your grandfather's time, they definitely didn't talk. Even in your parents' time, it
yeah.
was nothing that we talked about. Even when I used to talk about when I was a kid, growing up in a very strict Catholic household, it was you were just it was all imaginary friends, and oh, you'll be fine, and just kind of like poo-pooed away, like all
I
right,
mean, that's the thing, though. Growing up in like yourself, and I'm sure many other people that grew up in Roman Catholic environments, strict, with priests and nuns. I was educated by them. But as I point out, during the 70s, especially in London during them times, there was nothing that could influence my behavior or what I'd see and come into contact with. I mean, most of the time, like someone pointed out to me, if that was the case, why wasn't I seeing, anything to do with Jesus?
I get
And because this is what we were, I was, me and Sean particularly, we were taught in the church. We were either in the church or we were in the school. And whilst we were in the school, we were being taught by nuns. In the church it was priests, and back then as well with the TV, there was only 3 channels. Me and
right,
Sean often, as I said, acted as the remote control for our parents. If we used to get a clip around the ear roll if we didn't. And but and even then the TV was restricted. We wasn't allowed to watch it unless we were with a parent. And so there was
right,
nothing there that could influence, why would we see these particular grey beings or these Nordic types? There was just nothing there to influence that type
right.
of,
It's
because
not
we
like
also
now that you can just go Google anything and everything, and you
no,
can find out the whole history of, how many alien species there are and what they look
sure.
like and what they say and do.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, that could
Much
be
different time.
that could be the argument now, but certainly back then, there was certainly nothing around. I
Yeah,
mean, as I
nothing.
said, it would have been, especially if they were using string memories to trick you or to lure you somewhere, which they did with children. They can take images from a child's mind and recreate them almost through virtual reality to get them to, follow them to somewhere. It's almost like
Right,
it's almost like taking them as a cartoon character or a character that's that they're particularly fond of, and so the child will follow them, maybe go into what looks like a house or a tree that opens up, only to be a ship, and for them, so it's a trust in them through deception.
right.
um
Yeah. Well, I have another question. We're just about at the end of the show, but from Andrew on Twitter, he's asking me, with all the experiences that you've had, and even writing a book, how are you dealing with everything now?
that's a good question, and thank you for the question. Well, I I have PTSD. I can't sleep with the light off. I've got the light on. This light stays on all night for me. I can't. When it starts to get dark, I start to get a bit more jittery. It doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to have an abduction, but something I often get
Right,
something. I mean, I get a lot of um, interference from the military. When I have podcasts, especially in the United States, I do have a lot of problems with that, depending on what I'm talking about. If I talk about MILAB, I often get, I would say, energy. I would say tortured with technology. A bit like one of your guests who was a TI, targeted
yes,
individual. Remember,
uh-huh,
well,
yes,
somebody pointed out to me. My labs are, I guess, and abductees and anyone that experiences any type of phenomena that's not very good. It can be a targeted individual. I mean, my lab. The difference between targeted individuals and my labs is the technology is a lot different. Some of it's similar, but some of it's different. And I have had recently, Christina, where I've done a podcast, and I've had somebody screaming in my ear holes, literally telling me they were going to stab and kill my cat, who was actually with me at the time, and cursing me and talking about my book. This is electronic interference.
yes,
It's normally done by directed energy weapons,
right.
DEWs. So you get this type of phenomena. Um, I've got burn marks on my body and scars and everything from this type of phenomena. I've got literally one that I had a hole in my leg where I had to go to accident emergency, who then told me I should have been screaming my head off. It looked like it'd been done by a laser, and it was burnt so much that it burnt the tissue, and the scar remains. But when I had this happen to me, I was fast asleep when I had this particular one happen to me.
So you
And
didn't even feel it when it happened?
and no, and the thing is, on that particular night, I'd been working very late. At the time, I was working in the restaurant. I went out, I went back, I was walking back, which was basically a mile and a half away to where I was living at the time. It's because when you're being in a hot environment, you just want to walk and be in the cool air. And
Right.
and I remember everything in every detail. If you ask me what I did that night, I can tell you in every detail who I with, what I spoke about, every particular action where I worked at the restaurant to when I was coming home. But when I got in, I actually laid on the sofa. It was really hot. Laid on the sofa, or fell into a sleep. Must have done. Don't remember anything. I was still had my clothes on. I was wearing jeans at the time. I woke up, and then with groggy eyes and stuff, I went and I had a shower. When I was in the shower and I looked down, basically my leg was bleeding out. I had a big hole in it, in the left thigh, and literally it was so big you could put two fingers inside it.
Oh my gosh, Michael.
Yeah. And then I
Ooh.
was in so much pain. Then I managed to get to a taxi to an A&E, an hospital. And they examined it and they said to me, "How did you get this?" And I told them, and they said, "Listen, this looks like it's been done by a laser or something like this, but it couldn't have been." They said, "Because you would have woken up. Also, you would have had an hole in your jeans. There was nothing there, but clearly they could see this." And, for a long time, I couldn't walk. I was in so much pain. But then, like a week later, I had another one appear below that, which was a little bit smaller, but this one didn't leave so much of a scar. This one, to this day, it's on my leg still. It's a scar, and when you look at it, it looks like two fingers that are burnt into the skin. And
Oh, wow.
but you have this type of stuff with the abductions, and you have it with the MILABs, and I'm pretty sure TIs have it as well. Where you start to get these type of marks on your body. Sometimes it's like thinking, oh, did I knock it myself somewhere? And that's your left brain kicking in. And I'm not saying that everything is, part and parcel of this type of phenomena, because it could quite easily you've bumped into something. But when you're getting burns on your body and quite clearly you've not burnt yourself on with anything, there's something strange about this. So,
Yeah.
with the implants and with this type of stuff, it does happen, but
Well,
it's
after
just
I, okay.
it's just difficult, to discover how or why you're getting this type of, it's really difficult. I mean, I do, as I said, I do experience panic attacks. I have lots of flashbacks, and sometimes you wonder if you're ever going to be taken, if you're going to be brought back,
Right.
and it's difficult because when is it going to stop? And you can't, it doesn't stop. You can't get it to stop. It's just like goes on and on and on, and it's, who the hell wants this?
Right. No,
you know
I
some
completely
people
agree.
some people say, oh, you're special. I'm not special, and I don't know anyone who's an authentic abductee or MILAB would ever tell you they're chosen or they're special. I'm not special or chosen in any way, shape, or form.
Well,
you
you
know
might have been chosen, but chosen by somebody else to be a target, and that is
yeah,
not something that we sign up for or that we agree to. And again, I guess that's the biggest thing is the fact that it's against our will. And thankfully, other than that one experience I had, I don't have any memories of torturous or painful like you do. I did get after returning one time from having the precog dream, I did
yeah,
end up my whole back was bruised. I was
wow,
walking up the stairs and my daughter said, "Mom, what's wrong with your back?"
yeah,
Nothing. And she lifted it up and took a picture and showed, and it was black and blue. And then by a couple of hours, I started getting blisters, like
wow,
almost look
yeah,
like water blisters all over the back. And then they popped and they started bleeding. And so I went to the hospital too. I had no idea what it could possibly be. First, they thought maybe it was shingles. Came back, it wasn't shingles. Then they sent me to a dermatologist, and they said it looked more of a radiation burn than
yeah,
anything else. But I have no memory of anything like that. Nor did it even hurt before I found out,
yeah,
like you, until somebody pointed it out, and then it
yeah.
started kind of like getting worse and worse. Then yes, then it was painful. And yeah, it's just so weird how that goes on. Let's see. Christine is asking, how many years have you been tortured like this?
Well, I had experiences. I think I would say for the torturing part of it happened. It started when I was 16, after my dad had passed into spirit. And this is in my book. I do talk about this. Is probably where I started to, at the time I wasn't able to articulate it, but there was an experience that I had when I was 16 that involved two greys, and a United States military officer was present at the time, and I didn't see him at the time, but he was there during the abduction, observing. So I guess it happened. It started to happen more along these times, and it went on and on and on. But it's progressively, as I've gone through the years and writing this book, which is my first book, I've started to see more of the MILAB interactions with myself, more so now than the than the Greys. They seem to be much more active, I guess, in my life. And again, some of these experiences, a lot of them happen outside the body. Sometimes, when I write my next book, I'll explain something which is again a bizarre and unusual that happened to me outside of the body. Just as I was coming out of my body, I had three individuals that I now know were CIA. Um, outside of my body, that I could actually see them, hear them, and they were actually torturing me, and they told me it was for my own good and to keep my mouth shut. So,
Interesting.
so
Interesting.
a
You
lot of
think
the
what do you think it does it you think it has anything to do with that age? Because now that you're bringing that up,
mm,
my precog dreams started around 15, 16.
yeah.
Do you think that, and again, um, my abilities, my psychic abilities were very heightened by that age too. And part of it being going through puberty, everything, really not having any control, not knowing, like things were all over the place. I ended up with an attachment, like all kinds of stuff. What do you think that it has? Do you think that there's any correlation of the fact that things like this happen with Bilab around the teen years?
Well, we know that the MyLab seems to have taken place a lot later because because of the technology that's involved. Um, but it seems like it what we see from it though is that it seems like a lot of this activity happens not necessarily for the abduction, but it happens, especially paranormal activity, it seems to happen around people that are going through specific things in their lives. They could be in a divorce, they could be there's someone, a sibling, a parent could have died, they're having a tough time at work. There seems to be some sort of correlation between this as well. But
There's
certainly,
some kind of trauma going on.
yeah. But we see this. I mean, there are things that are similar, should I say, with the demonic energies and the greys. And even with the human element, what we would describe as, I would say, psychological warfare tactics used against people. Certainly, the ability to isolate one particular person from others, to break them down. Uh, you
Right.
know, so when the person's mentally broken down, the body, as well, it's much easier to control that person.
Yeah.
And I think across the field, certainly, as I said, with the demonics, with the greys particularly, some people might say the reptilians. I don't mention these much, but and well, certainly with the military, and the alphabet agencies, this is something which they are involved in. And there are similarities. I think this is where it gets confused, where some people think it's the same type of uh, you know the greys are the demonics, or the demonics are, and I don't believe that, because I believe what you're seeing here is that they're using similar tactics, but like we said, with the methodologies are slightly different, I believe, with some of them, like with the military and with the greys, or the human element and the greys. But these particular beings, whether they're demonic, whether they're non-human, or or that they will be able to move in specific locations interdimensionally, so they'll be aware of each other, that each one of them has a different agenda. But I think with most of these, that their intentions towards human beings are not good.
I've also noticed, through interviewing people as well as my own self, people like us, we tend to experience a lot of trauma through our life. It seems like if there was no such thing as bad luck, we would have absolutely no luck at all. That, you know, I always say people will say, "Oh, I believed your story for a little while, but then it sounded like it came right out of a movie."
Mm,
And I can't even fault them because some of the stories that I tell when I like listen back to them, it does sound that way. And then people who like have been around me all my life or have or spend a lot of time with me, like my team, they'll say, "Oh, wow, you know what? I used to think that you were like adding a whole lot to your stories until we
yeah.
hung out with you. And now we realize, like, wow." I mean, it's like one catastrophe happening after another to the point that each time when you get to the point where you feel like you can't go on anymore, like that you're just done, but yet you somehow come back only for something else to happen and to experience it all over again.
I mean, it's true though. I mean, some of the experiences seem really, really bizarre. And as I said, if I
Right,
wasn't involved in this phenomena, maybe I'd think the same thing as well. You can't help
right.
really people for thinking that, but I always say to people, whatever you throw at me is, I'm my worst critic. I'm the
Yes.
person that's the hardest on myself with all of
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
It's it's also very isolating. It's very lonely, when you have these experiences, because who do you tell a lot of the time? I mean, we're speaking here, but when I was growing up with this stuff, like many of us,
Yeah.
even people that are in paranormal experiences in haunted houses or something like this, who the hell do you tell?
Right.
You know,
And
you know.
even if you know people who are into the paranormal, that was what my issue was that I was in the paranormal, right? And then I'm also interviewing all these abductees and contactees. But when I started, figuring things out and having other things happen, it's like you can't go to the paranormal people and talk to them about it because
No.
like that's like, oh, you're going too far now.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
talking about demons and haunted houses and poltergeist, you're talking about abduction, like that's too far. And so you're right, and the same thing, I came across the same thing in the ufology field, that when I would talk about that, it was fine, I got a lot of support, but then when I
Mm,
talked about all the paranormal stuff that I felt like was connected with it, they're like, "Oh, hold on, Christina, like you need to keep that stuff over there in these things don't intermingle." And again, that's why I'm so happy to have you on tonight, because unfortunately we share a similar, story where we know these things intertwine. And I
they
think
do.
that this is the biggest part of doing shows like this and putting people's stories out there like this, because even though it's more acceptable,
Mm.
there's still a lot of hate, and there's still a lot of people that got a lot of really nasty things to say about it. So I think it's even when people push against it, I think that's where it's so important to get this information out, because there's got to be other people like us. I thought I was the only one, and then I meet other people and I'm like, yeah, I'm not.
I mean, this is the thing, though. This is why we've got to keep talking about it. We write books, we're getting awareness out there, we're talking about it. We're as well, asking for other people if they want to share their experiences, and also to give them a voice as well. There are people out
Yeah,
there that probably are frightened to talk about this still, even today, even though with the social media, for depending what their circumstances are. I mean, one of the things that you're seeing as well now is there's lots more, especially in the United States, there's lots more people in the military, the traditional military, and not the ones that we talk about, that are hidden behind the scenes in these various secretive projects. But there are a lot more of these coming into our communities, because who have they got to talk to?
right.
A lot of them are they're sworn in under the Official Secrets Act. They're often monitored. They're often threatened. But who do they talk to? So the only people they got to go to now are the people that originally thought we were all crazy. So they're
Yeah.
coming to us because it's becoming it's becoming much more. A lot more people are talking about it. They
Well, no,
might they we don't understand it all, but we're trying to, with everyone that talks about it and shares their experiences, it's from that so that we can then gain some type of information that we can research.
Well, maybe we need to, create some kind of support group that, supports people just like us that have a combination of things.
Yeah.
Because again, it's so crazy that we have experiences that we can relate to on the different sides, but there's nothing really that's right in the middle that says yes, this is for all the people that have everything.
Yeah, I know. It's really, you don't want none of it.
Yeah, but if you have to, you might as well try to be brought together with other people like you, because I think that's the hardest part of experiencing stuff like this is the loneliness and feeling completely almost like the outcast.
I mean, I've not spoken about this before, but when things started to get bad and really dark for me at the time, I took my life. I ended my life. I took it. I committed suicide. I write about that in book two. I took my own life because there was no one I could go to. There was no one I could share this with. And there's nowhere I could go. I couldn't stop it. And so I took my life and I ended up in hospital and literally was 50-50, live or die. And I was in hospital for a long time. And when I was in hospital, even, I was treated like dirt by the nurses there because they don't believe in that. But
Right,
and I could never explain to them why I had to make up a cock and bull story about, just so that the social services at the time wouldn't lock me away for
right,
being
right,
unsafe to myself. It's not now. This was like,
right,
a long, long time ago. But at the time, I started to self harm because I wasn't able to express to anyone what I was feeling. I didn't have any family around me. So I started to self harm to try to feel something. And then that then started to, that got to a point where, I couldn't stop any of this. Didn't have nowhere to go with it. So I thought, I've had enough. I don't want this no more. And I did. I took my life. And this is what's dangerous about this phenomena. When you're being ridiculed and when you're being laughed at and when you're told it's a load of rubbish, but it may be for other people but not for us. It's a phenomena that's real, that we experience, and it's frightening. And it causes us so many problems. It's like they come, they take us, but then what's left? We're left with this. You have no one you have no one to go to, even professionally, with it, who you can trust. And
yeah.
so, but I did recover, and life went on.
Yeah, Debbie's saying the government and all the people who believe the government call us conspiracy theorists. And if you're classified as crazy, your whole life is affected. You have to keep it quiet, and that takes a toll. And it absolutely does. It's not so much of people not believing us, it's the fact that we can't stop it. Even if we have support, there's no way to stop it. Like that's I think the part that like people don't understand, like the toll that that can take, and the crazy part too is that even if you try to take your life, what I found when I had my near death experience is that we do not go until it's our time, until we have
No,
done whatever it is we're supposed to do here. So we can try, but it's not going to do any good.
no, but as I said, I'd done this because at the time I was desperate. I didn't have no one to talk to. There's nowhere I could go with it. There's just nothing. So it's you know, and I don't. This is not something I would, tell anyone to do, or it's not the way forward. But this was
Right.
just my own experience. But but it, at that time we didn't have, we didn't have the social media at this time. So it's easier now to talk to people. And
Well, at least,
like you were
yeah,
saying, Christina. Yeah.
yeah, at least we can find, we can somehow manipulate, find us a way to other people like us. And I mean, I know just talking to you online at different times, going through different things and just talking about just it makes it feel good just to know that
Yeah.
somebody else understands, and even if I just want to vent or just talk, like I've got that person. So I want you to know that I believe the universe connects people with people they're supposed to be with at the time they're supposed to meet them. And I think that I met you at the perfect time because I think that you are an amazing person. I am so sorry that you've had to experience, what you've experienced. I will say that people like us, even though we don't feel like we are very strong, I recognize there's a very small percentage of people that could survive everything that we've gone through.
Yeah. Thank
So
you. I
give
mean,
yourself a pat
that's
on
for
the back
everyone.
for I
But
mean, you're doing the best you can with the situation that you were given, and it's definitely not what you expected or chose for how your life to be.
no, most definitely not. But it's again, it's also to do with helping each of us, helping us. Being supportive in the community.
Absolutely. I completely agree. If people want to get your book, because again, we've touched on little bits and pieces of the book, but obviously we don't want to give it all away because we want you guys to go out and buy it and read it. Where can they find it if they would like to buy the book?
Yeah, it's available on Amazon. It's on paperback, hardcover. Um, it's on Kindle and it's on the audio book.
Oh wow,
Um,
so you got all kinds. It's all over the place.
it's getting there, yeah. And
There you go.
I'm working on book 2 at the moment.
Well, I
But
hope that when you put book two number out, I'm one of the first people that you call to come on the show to promote it.
one of the things I was going to say is going forward on my future books, I will be writing some using channeled information.
Oh, interesting.
So I'll be channeling some of the books, and be talking about specific subjects here, um, but um, but obviously some other topics which are much more positive, I would say.
Yeah. Well, Karen is saying it's a brilliant book. Debbie saying she loves Audible.
Thank you,
Christina,
guys.
she can't wait to read the book. So yeah, everybody, go out there and check it out. I mean, again, we've only touched on such a small part. I mean, he's got such an amazing story, and you know, people like us, we have stories for days. We could just do a 24-hour series, and we could just probably just literally talk about everything that's happened throughout our life, and we'd still have plenty of time to talk about more.
It would go on and on.
Absolutely. Well, I so appreciate you being on the show. I look forward to having you back when your next book comes out. But
Yeah,
of
thank you,
course,
Christina.
off of the show, you definitely have a friend in me, and we're going to keep in touch, and we're going to continue talking. And just
Sure.
know, no matter how far away we are separated, I am always here, always. If
Yeah,
you
thank
ever
you,
need to talk,
Christina. and
any
and
time of day, it doesn't matter.
and thank you for everyone that's listened in, and I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And everybody, again, I did the show a little later today because I had an emergency at work, so I couldn't get here so early. So a lot of the people who I know were going to be here were not able to make it. So please make sure once you watch this, once you see this, or once you get done with the show, share, share, share. Share it onto your page, share it onto your group pages, on with your friends, anywhere you can. Because again, this is the kind of information we really need to get out. Again, you find Michael's book on Amazon. Go find it. By Strangeness. Oh, all right, my friend. Thank you so very much. All right, everybody in the audience, thank you so very much. And oh, Karen, thank you for sharing on Facebook. I'm glad, Rebecca, I'm glad you enjoyed the show. With that being said, I will see you all next week. I think I'm just going to start putting up uh, a list of everybody I'm going to have for the month because there's just so many great shows coming up. You guys will not be disappointed. Make sure to join and also check out Paranormal Connections on Sunday nights. I'll be talking about the extreme haunt. Well, I'm going to re-talk about this. The extreme haunt torture chamber of what is called McCamey Manor. We're going to give you an update. I helped
Mm.
shut this place down years ago, and we moved to Tennessee. So everybody's asking what's the update. There's a new movie out about it, so we're going to cover it all. We're even going to talk to some of the people who have still gone through. And is it any different? Well, we're going to find out. That being said, I'll see you next week. Love you guys.
Bye.